Rambler number 9 for Tuesday, April 17th, 1750. The fondness of every man for his profession, the gradual improvement of manufacturers. It begins with a little Latin here, and then which I'll skip, and then there's the quote. Choose what you are, no other state prefer. Elphinston. It is justly remarked by Horace that howsoever every man may complain occasionally of the hardships of his condition, he is seldom willing to change it for any other on the same level. For whether it be that he who follows an employment made choice of it at first on account of its suitableness to his inclination, or that when accident or the determination of others have placed him in a particular station, he, by endeavoring to reconcile himself to it, gets the custom of viewing it only on the fairest side, or whether every man thinks that class to which he belongs the most illustrious, merely because he has honored it with his name. It is certain that, whatever be the reason, most men have a very strong and active prejudice in favor of their own vocation, always working upon their minds and influencing their behavior. This partiality is sufficiently visible in every rank of human species, but it exerts itself more frequently and with greater force among those who have never learned to conceal their sentiments for reasons of policy or to mold their expressions by the laws of politeness, and therefore the chief contests of wit among artificers and handicraftsmen arise from a mutual endeavor to exalt one trade by deprecating another. From this same principle are derived many consolations to alleviate the inconveniences to which every calling is peculiarly exposed. A blacksmith was lately pleasing himself at his anvil, with observing that though his trade was hot and sooty, laborious and unhealthy, yet he had the honor of living by his hammer. He got his bread like a man, and if his son should rise in the world and keep his coach, nobody could reproach him that his father was a tailor. A man truly zealous for his fraternity is never so irresistibly flattered as when some rival calling is mentioned with contempt. Upon this principle, a linen draper boasted that he had got a new customer whom he could safely trust, for he could have no doubt of his honesty, since it was known from unquestionable authority that he was now filling a bill in chancery to delay payment for the clothes which he had worn the last 7 years, and he himself had heard him declare in a public coffee-house that he looked upon the whole generation of woolen drapers to be such despicable wretches that no gentleman ought to pay them. It has been observed that physicians and lawyers are no friends to religion, and many conjectures have been formed to discover the reason for such a combination between men who agree in nothing else, and who seem less to be affected in their own provinces by religious opinions than any other part of the community. The truth is, very few of them have thought about religion, but they have all seen a parson, seen him in a habit different from their own, and therefore declared war against him. A young student from the Inns of Court, who has often attacked the curate of his father's parish with such arguments as his acquaintances could furnish, and returned to town without success, is now gone down with a resolution to destroy him, for he has learned at last how to manage a prig, and if he pretends to hold him again in syllogism, he has a catch in reserve, which neither logic nor metaphysics can resist. I laugh to think how your unshaken Cato will look aghast when unforeseen destruction pours in upon him thus. The malignity of soldiers and sailors against each other has been often experienced at the cost of their country, and perhaps no orders of men have an enmity of more acrimony or longer continuance. When, upon our late successes at sea, some new regulations were concerted for establishing the rank of the naval commanders, a captain of foot very acutely remarked that nothing was more absurd than to give any honorary rewards to seamen. Here's a quote. "For honor," says he, "ought only to be won by bravery, and all the world knows that in a sea fight there is no danger, and therefore no evidence of courage." But although this general desire of aggrandizing themselves by raising their profession betrays men to 1,000 ridiculous and mischievous acts of supplication and detraction, yet as almost all passions have their good as well as bad effects, it likewise excites ingenuity, and sometimes raises an honest and useful emulation of diligence. It may be observed in general that no trade had ever reached the excellence to which it is now improved, had its professors looked upon it with the eyes of indifferent spectators. The advances from the first rude essays must have been made by men who valued themselves for performances, for which scarce any other would be persuaded to esteem them. It is pleasing to contemplate a manufacture rising gradually from its first mean state by the successive labors of innumerable minds. To consider the first hollow trunk of an oak, in which perhaps the shepherd could scarce venture to cross a brook swelled with a shower, enlarged at last into a ship of war, attacking fortresses, terrifying nations, setting storms and billows at defiance, and visiting the remotest parts of the globe. And it might contribute to dispose us to a kinder regard for the labors of one another, if we were to consider from what unpromising beginnings the most useful productions of art have probably arisen. Who, when he saw the first sand or ashes, by a casual intenseness of the heat, melted into a metalline form, rugged with excrescences and clouded with impurities, would have imagined that in this shapeless lump lay concealed so many conveniences of life as would in time constitute a great part of the happiness of the world. Yet by some such fortuitous liquefaction was mankind taught to procure a body at once in a high degree solid and transparent, which might admit the light of the sun and exclude the violence of the wind, which might extend the sight of the philosopher to new ranges of existence, and charm him at one time with the unbounded extent of the material creation, and at another with the endless subordination of animal life, and what is yet of more importance, might supply the decays of nature, and succor old age with subsidiary sight. Thus was the first artificer in glass employed, though without his own knowledge or expectation. He was facilitating and prolonging the enjoyment of light, enlarging the avenues of science, and conferring the highest and most lasting pleasures. He was enabling the student to contemplate nature, and the beauty to behold herself. This passion for the honor of a profession, like that for the grandeur of our own country, is to be regulated, not extinguished. Every man, from the highest to the lowest station, ought to warm his heart and animate his endeavors with the hopes of being useful to the world, by advancing the art which it is his lot to exercise, and for that end he must necessarily consider the whole extent of its application, and the whole weight of its importance. But let him not too readily imagine that another is ill employed because for want of fuller knowledge of his business he is not able to comprehend its dignity. Every man ought to endeavor at eminence, not by pulling others down, but by raising himself, and enjoy the pleasures of his own superiority, whether imagination or imaginary or real, without interrupting others in the same felicity. The philosopher may very justly be delighted with the extent of his views, and the artificer with the readiness of his hands. But let the one remember that, without mechanical performances, refined speculation is an empty dream, and the other that, without theoretical reasoning, dexterity is little more than a brute instinct.